This video will not be a fun, airy, happy little excursion into the world of folks who do the dumbs. This video is a dark, heavy, graphic look into what real tyranny looks like. So many of our frauditor and soft-sit friends like to yell tyranny, but have no clue what that tyranny really is. I am going to show you.
What is totalitarianism? Broadly construed, totalitarianism means rule by the law. It is often viewed as the opposite of democracy. As the opposite of democracy, totalitarianism is a form of government and a political system that prohibits all opposition parties, outlaws individual opposition to the state and its claims, and exercises an extremely high degree of control over public and private life. It is regarded as the most extreme and complete form of authoritarianism. Hence, in totalitarian states, political power is often held by autocrats, such as dictators and absolute monarchs, who employ all-encompassing campaigns in which propaganda is broadcast by state-controlled mass media in order to control the citizenry. It is important to note that the concept of totalitarianism emerged in response to certain political developments in Europe in the interwar years, especially the rise of Nazism and Stalinism. Also known as the state, a totalitarian government imposes a set of beliefs on its people who must conform or face unpleasant, and often violent consequences. This is called oppression. The state holds absolute power to maintain control over all areas in the lives of its citizens. The law does not apply to the state, and they ignore basic human rights. Below are some of the basic characteristics of a totalitarianism. 1. Individual freedoms or ownership of personal property is restricted or not permitted in any way. 2. Personal beliefs and faith in religion other than the ideals of the state is met with severe consequences. 3. Information or any form of media from outside the state is not permitted. The state only releases information that promotes its own point of view or political cause. Citizens are denied access to any information that can cause a revolt. 4. All legal traditions are discarded as the role of lawmaker is taken by the ruler. Police operate under the state's law. Decisions and judgments are passed according to the interpretations of the ruler. Fair and equal justice is denied. 5. Opposition to the state is punishable and considered evil. Large-scale organized violence is permitted by the state to force the people into conforming. 6. Limiting or withholding the supply of food to its citizens. The fear of starvation is a powerful strategy that reinforces the reliance of the people on the ruler for all their needs, therefore developing loyalty towards the ideals of the state. And 7. Social gatherings and traditions are banned. The state controls who people can visit and for what reason. This suppresses any community discussion and eliminates any forces of influence beyond the control of the state. As a result, the society becomes weakened.
Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, you're watching Top 10's Net, and in the video today we're looking at the top 10 brutal dictators who you've never heard of. Adolf Hitler, Chairman Mao, Joseph Stalin, we tend to remember the names of the worst dictators, if only because we can't believe anyone could ever be so cheerfully inhumane. But how many of us know that there is a second tier of despots, a sort of B-league for insane tyrants? In the video today, we're looking at 10 evil dictators you've never heard of who nonetheless made life miserable for millions of people.
Number 10. Park Chung-hee from South Korea. Unless you grew up before the 1980s, it might surprise you to learn that North Korea wasn't always the only crazy dictatorship on the peninsula. Until 1978, South Korea was ruled by an iron fist by authoritarian strongman Park Chung-hee. And you better believe he was as loony as his northern neighbor. Under his regime, men were imprisoned for growing hair long, and women had their skirts measured each day to ensure they weren't showing off too much leg. But life in Park's career wasn't all authoritarian japes. Underneath the petty restrictions lurked some serious human rights abuses. He manipulated elections, closed down the press, had political opponents tortured and executed, and once had his goons nearly throw South Korea's future president into the ocean with some concrete boots. Eventually, things got so bad that his best friend had to assassinate him, ushering in something more or less resembling democracy. Number 9. Juan Maria Bordaberry from Uruguay. During the 70s and 80s, Uruguay was ruled by a succession of dictators, the baddest of who was Jean Maria Bordaberry. Although initially elected to power, he quickly clamped down on civil liberties by having the entire opposition imprisoned or murdered and suspending the constitution. He also encouraged an almost bizarre level of creativity among his security forces, culminating in their forcing the future president of the country to spend 2 years sitting at the bottom of a well outside the capital. Although his reign was relatively short compared to some on this list, his Uruguay became known for having the highest concentration per capita of political prisoners anywhere on Earth. A heck of an achievement considering that the Soviet Union was still active at the time. He was eventually replaced by the army in 1976, who found his apparently unswerving dedication to military fascism even more disturbing than democratic rule. Number 8. Emomali Rahmon from Tajikistan. There's a fairly good chance you've neither heard of Rahmon nor the country he's been lording over these last 22 years, and why should you? Tajikistan is almost unbelievably poor, unbelievably small, and squashed right up against the far more famous, for all the wrong reasons, nation of Afghanistan. Yet its 7 million citizens live under one of the evilest dudes in history. Freedom of speech is so curtailed in Tajikistan that you can go to jail for just telling a joke. And Tajik jails are no laughing matter. Rahmon's thugs are famous for torturing anyone they don't like the look of by electrocuting them, pouring boiling water on them, or simply laying into them with an iron bar. People frequently die in custody, and children as young as 7 have been jailed for plotting to overthrow the state. It's thought that the president is currently an Al-Qaeda target, and for once, we're kind of happy to side with them. Number 7. Islam Karimov, Uzbekistan. Just across the border from Tajikistan sits a regime that could give Kim Jong-un's North Korea a run for its money. President Islam Karimov is the sort of guy who gives new meanings to the word cruel. During his 25-year tenure, his security forces have massacred hundreds of protesters, detained and tortured people on a purely random basis, and even had ordinary Uzbeks boiled alive. Unbelievably, this isn't even yet the worst part. That honor goes to the annual Uzbek cotton harvest. Every single year, 1 million people are randomly abducted from their homes and forced to work in slave labor conditions for 0 pay, bringing in the cotton. This enslavement lasts 3 months, and there are no guarantees you'll still have a job or home when you're freed. Children as young as 6 have been worked to death during the harvest period, and no one in power seems to give a damn. Meanwhile, celebrities like Sting fly hundreds of miles to sing for Karimov's spoiled daughters. Kinda makes you sick, doesn't it? Number 6. Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov from Turkmenistan, and I apologize if I'm butchering that name. The reason you've never heard of Turkmenistan's current dictator is twofold. The first one is probably that no one has any idea how to pronounce his name. Second, he took over from Saparmurat Niyazov, a man so crazy he ordered a giant ice palace built in the middle of the desert, banned beards, and used a national fund to launch his own autobiography into space. But if people weren't expecting his successor to be any better, they were soon disappointed. Although less crazy, Gurbanguly has made a name for himself by allowing his security services to disappear or torture anyone they feel like. Since this torture often includes rape, electrocution, and medical experimentation, it's probably fair to say that Gurbanguly's encroaching on Hitler's territory with his psychosis. Like his predecessor, he's also written a book, this time on horse breeding. What an oddly sweet topic for a man who made it illegal to leave your hometown under penalty of torture. Number 5. General Alfredo Stroessner from Paraguay. Stroessner was one of the longest-serving dictators in history, managing to cling to power from 1954 until his exile to Brazil in 1989. he was also a rampant egomaniac, and one of his first actions on seizing power was to construct a gigantic neon sign with his name emblazoned across it in the hills above the capital and switching it on every single night. Throughout his entire reign, the only newspaper allowed in the country printed 6 flattering full-color photographs of him on its front page every single day. Less amusingly, he also built concentration camps in the countryside that swallowed up nearly every political opponent in the country. Those who weren't rounded up were usually found decapitated or were placed in airplanes, flown high above the countryside, and pushed out without a parachute. As final proof that he was a bit of a dick, Stroessner's Paraguay also became a safe house for Nazi war criminals, including the notorious Auschwitz Angel of Death, Joseph Mengele. Number 4. Francisco Macias Nguema from Equatorial Guinea. Even on a continent known for its crazy, brutal dictators, President for Life Francisco Macias Nguema was something else. Paranoid to the point of comedy, he rarely entered the capital, preferring instead to live in a tiny hut in the countryside with the national treasury hidden under his bed. This was bad news for people who lived in the city, as a presidential decree meant power only got switched on when Nguema was visiting, which wasn't very often. In a bizarre bout of insanity, he also once ordered everyone with glasses killed for reasons which probably sounded fine in his own head. His brutality was also legendary. Under his rule, slavery was reintroduced and journalists were hacked to pieces with machetes and fed to sharks. By the time he was assassinated, he had murdered 1/3 of the population, more than even Stalin managed in his blood-soaked rule. He was evil enough to give any 20th century dictator a run for his money, and most of us have never even heard of him. Number 3. Rafael Trujillo from the Dominican Republic. Rafael Trujillo has a reputation as the cruelest man in the Americas, and while that may be an exaggeration, especially considering the next 2 entries on this list, he certainly wasn't a balanced sort of guy. First off, there was his obvious insanity. During his reign, he had himself appointed God, his wife Queen of the World, and his 3-year-old son a general. Second, there was his brutality. During his reign, he conducted a campaign of genocide against the Haitian population, had 50,000 of his own people murdered, and ushered in the use of torture instruments like an electric chair, perfectly calibrated to keep its victims alive and in maximum pain. People were routinely detained and tortured for little to no reason, and disappearances were common. Eventually, Trujillo was gunned down by a group of seriously angry citizens, all of whom are still considered heroes to this day. Number 2. Jose Efrain Rios Montt from Guatemala. When history remembers you as the worst part of Guatemala's psychotically violent 36-year civil war, then you know your answer. Meet the man with this dubious fame to claim. Jose Efrain Rios Montt was the dictator of Guatemala for a mere 17 months, yet that was enough to ensure his legacy as one of the cruelest men who ever lived. Up until the point Montt seized power, Guatemala had been fighting an underground war against communists. Reasoning that communists were popular with the poor, Montt dreamt up a novel way of removing the threat. He decided to kill literally every single poor person in Guatemala. And he almost succeeded. During his time in office, 10,000 people were murdered, a further 100,000 were turned into refugees, and 600 rural villages were completely annihilated. Just to prove how much of an arsehole he was, Montt then topped this by committing genocide, ordering his forces to rape, murder, and starve vast swaths of the indigenous population to death. He's currently living in comfort at his home in Guatemala, final proof against the existence of a loving God. Number 1. Jorge Rafael Videla from Argentina. If they handed out awards for most cartoonishly evil human in history, Jorge Rafael Videla would sweep the boards every time. The tyrannical leader of Argentina from 1976 to 1981 orchestrated the country's dirty war, a polite euphemism for saying his security forces murdered upwards of 40,000 people in 7 years and tortured over 100,000. During his tenure, it became common practice for dissenters to be thrown from planes to drown in the Atlantic Ocean, and starvation and institutional rape were also widespread. But even all of this had nothing on his most absurd and horrifying crime of all. Videla has the distinction of being one of the only human beings on Earth to literally be convicted of stealing babies. At least 400 newborns were either taken from the homes of political prisoners or raised by the military when their mothers were executed immediately after giving birth. In terms of evil, that's almost off the scale, and yet, once again, most of us have probably never even heard of this murderous arse clown.
And this is what true tyranny true totalitarianism brings us.
This video was shot by Taliban militants in November 2016 after they'd shot down an Afghan military helicopter. It was the start of a horrific chain of events that one of the survivors has now spoken about to RFERL's Radio Azadi. This was Hazibullah Faizi, then a 22-year-old Afghan National Army commando. He's being paraded with his comrades in front of a Taliban cameraman. It's the beginning of a terrifying ordeal.
6 نفرن دیوالای ما با مرمی کشتن. اما تو پیشوری ما 12 نفر ما اسیر شدن که با شمول خودم ما را گرفتن بردن جای تلاشی کردن تلفنای ما را گرفتن با زنگ آمد که یارا نکشه با قاری صاحب صلاح الدین یارا را تبادله میکنه والی نام نهاد طالبان دولت فاریاب بوده کورا از شندن هرات دستگیر شده بوده واه بینی وضعیت این شکنجه چی باشه نه نمیدادن من تقریبا کل چیز با دوش خودم بود لط خوردم من با شکنجه نهایت به این شکنجه رسیدیم از کجاش قطع یعنی تصویرای ما میبینی که به این شکنجه رسیدیم پیش طالبان ها دیگه چه قطع شکنجه کنم با ما شکنجه طالبان قنداقای که در کمر ما خورده اصابت فامیل باعثی شده که شکنجه سیاه گشته
In his interview with RFERL, Faizi showed us medical records and disturbing photos. They document the injuries that he says he sustained during 6 months as a Taliban prisoner. He recounted chilling details of how he was tortured.
بسیار وضعیت خراب بود طالبان شکنجه ما در زگه ما کشیدین که اسناد دارمانه بخاطر میبینی شکنجه طالبان را که ما در فیلمای میبینید تصویرای با نو خاطر نامزاد خودم فسخ کردم.
Two of the documents he showed us, such as this one from the main military medical facility in Kabul, appeared to confirm that Faizi has suffered serious injuries to his testicles. He spent 9 months in the hospital after his release. A Taliban spokesman sent RFERL an audio message denying that Faizi was tortured. In fact, Faizi's release was secured in exchange for his brother, Makbul, pictured here as a Taliban prisoner in chains. The Taliban has repeatedly denied carrying out atrocities, but in recent weeks there has been mounting evidence of summary executions and mistreatment. This video appears to show Taliban militants gunning down prisoners in July of this year. It was widely shared online and is just one example of multiple reports of detainees being killed. Faizi says the Defence Ministry paid a $10,000 ransom to secure his brother's release. A ministry spokesman would neither confirm nor deny this. To this day, Faizi is deeply traumatized by his experiences.
سخت مرگ میخوایم خداوند نمیته شب و روزه میگیرم گفتم شب دعا میکنم خدا به من مرگ نصیب کنید از این که سرم چی باشه میگن تا حال خبر کسی ندارم مرگ میخوایم خداوند مرگم نصیب
Now, the next time one of you chicken-livered baby men want to say that police, or anyone else for that matter, are assaulting you and creating tyranny, I want you to watch this video over again. You have no idea what tyranny is, you pukes.